Hi guys. Before we start, can you let me know in the chat if you can hear me well? If I can get a yes or I can hear you well in the chat, so I know everything is working. Okay, perfect. I see an enthusiastic yes with an exclamation mark and a thumbs up, so that's perfect. So welcome to the free session for strategy and organization. Before I share my screen and the slides, I'm actually very curious. I know a lot of you are first year students, and this is only your second week of classes. So I'm very curious how you find the student life so far and studying at UvA. So can everyone send me some kind of reaction that represents how you are feeling so far? I'm very curious if it will be crying faces or happy faces, maybe some hearts. You can be very honest. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up, another thumbs up. Okay, another thumbs up. Okay, I see some happy emojis. I don't see any tears so far, which is great. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen and then we can start our free session. Right, so I asked the question of how you feel because I know the first weeks of uni can be very overwhelming. That's the time when you are new to the courses, you are new, a lot of you, to the Dutch education system, and everything can just be super stressful. So that's why we are here for. We want to make the exam experience as pleasant for you as possible by showing you how you can study, what you should study, and just kind of showing you that the courses actually don't always are not always as scary as they first may seem. So a quick introduction about myself. I am a tutor for strategy and organization. So today, of course, you are only seeing me for 1 hour, but if you decide to also take the midterm training, you will see more of me. So right now I am a master's student and I am studying digital marketing. Before I was doing bachelor's in business administration, so exactly the same study that you guys are doing. So 4 years ago, I was exactly in the same spot that you are in. I was also very stressed about my courses, feeling a bit lost, but trust me, it does get better. Apart from studies, I really love traveling, reading, and drinking coffee. I feel like three very basic things that a lot of people also like. But yeah, these are really my favorite things to do. And when it comes to teaching, I have been a tutor for, I think this is my 4th year. So I've taught a lot of courses, but strategy and organization and also BOP, which is a course that you will have in the 5th block of the first year, are two of my favorite courses to teach. So strategy and organization can seem a bit overwhelming in terms of concepts and how many definitions and models there are. But hopefully after today, you will realize that it is actually a really fun course. And a lot of those models that they introduce are very applicable to the rest of your bachelor's and actually also your professional life. So I hope we do have some fun together today. Before we start, we do have a WhatsApp group. So I have seen that a lot of you have already joined, but for those of you who haven't, I will give you 30 seconds to quickly scan the code. And it's super important that you are in there because that's where the slides will be shared. So 30 seconds, and then we will move on to our next slide. All right, I'm gonna move on. If this didn't work for you, I can also show it again at the end of the session. But for now, very important question. Let me see if I can launch a poll for you guys. So there is a question. Does what you see on the screen, the model, look familiar to you? Okay, I see 11 responses, 14 responses, 20 responses. Perfect. And they are all positive so far. So it seems like the model is recognizable to everyone, which is a very good thing. All right. So then another question that follows up on that, I see a lot of you do recognize the poll. You can also see the results. We have 21 answers and everyone recognizes the model. But now let's go to a more important question. And this is, how well do you understand what you see on the slide? Or in other words, how confident do you feel that if there are questions on the exam about this model, you will be able to answer them correctly? All right, I have 18, 21 responses, 22 responses. Okay, one more, and then I will share the results of the poll. One more person. There we go. All right, so you can see the results. I actually see that a lot of you are already on the 60 and 80% mark, which is very, very good. But the goal of today is for everyone to be able to click on the 100% towards the end of the session. So I really want to make sure that the Porter's 5 forces model is something that you will absolutely get right on the exam. Okay, I think someone is unmuted. Okay, perfect. So before I dive into Porter's 5 forces, very important information about your midterm. So you probably already know that your midterm consists of 7 chapters, and all of these chapters have an equal distribution in your exam. However, the Porter's 5 forces is a building block for this course and actually for your entire bachelor's. So one of the reasons why we chose this topic for the free session is because it is really crucial that you understand it in order to do well in this course. But actually, this is a model that you will see throughout your bachelor's. So you will see it in other courses in year 1, other courses in year 2, other courses in year 3, to the point that when you are getting your diploma in 3 years, you will probably puke when hearing the topic. So it is very important, and the more you understand it now, the better you will do in your bachelor's. Right, so the goal of today is again for you to be able to answer all the questions about Porter's 5 forces correctly. I will give you 1 minute to look at these questions. You don't have to answer them right now. We will come back to them at the end of the session, but just to get an idea of how Porter's 5 forces could be asked on the exam, right? So take a couple of seconds to read through them, and then we will start our theory for today's session. All right, I hope everyone had time to read through it. Again, we will do these questions at the end of the session, and there will also be 10 other practice questions so we can make sure that everyone got the most of the theory that we will be discussing today. So going quickly into our planning, you can see we have 4 points to discuss. The first is, of course, the threat of new entrants. Then we will dive into the bargaining power of suppliers and buyers. Third step, we will have the threat of substitute products, and then intensity of rivalry will be our finishing topic. All right, so here we go. So to start with, why is it important to use Porter's 5 forces in the first place? Right? This is a model that we use to analyze the external environment and especially the industry's profitability, right? So imagine that you are starting a new company and you want to check whether the market you want to enter is actually worth of entering, meaning, will you have a lot of customers in this market? Is this market profitable? Or in other words, what they like to use in discourse is whether the market is attractive. So what do we do to check if the market is attractive or worth entering? First of all, we look at the threat of new entrants. The threat of new entrants quite logically means how likely is it that we will have new competitors entering the market, right? So if it is likely that new competitors will enter, we have high threat of new entrants. But if it is unlikely that we will have new competitors, we have a low threat of new entrants. And you can already kind of connect the dots and realize that the more likely it is that a new competitor will enter, the less attractive the industry is, right? So if you are a business owner, you want as little competition and as little new competition as possible. And now, very, very important, and this is where a lot of people make mistakes on the exam, is the distinction between threat of new entrants and barriers to entry, right? Barriers to entry is kind of like a concept that connects to the threat of new entrants that play an important role in determining the threat of new entrants. But how it works is that if we have high barriers to entry, it means that it is harder to enter the industry for new competitors. Hence, threat of new entrants will be lower. So what you should know is that these two terms work in opposite. So the higher the barriers to entry, the lower the threat of new entrants. And the lower the barriers to entry means that it is actually easier to enter a certain market, and threat of new entrants will actually be higher. So I have a lot of students in this course kind of thinking that these two are synonyms or that they work in the same way, but they actually work on the opposites. So we either have high threat of new entrants and low barriers to entry, or low threat of new entrants with high barriers of entry. And now, of course, you need to know what the barriers of entry could be. So what are some examples of things that could potentially stop people from entering the market? Well, first of all, a big barrier to entry is the economies of scale. Economies of scale, and again, this concept will also come up, I think, before your midterm in this course, but in case you haven't heard of it yet, economies of scale means that the more a company produces a certain output, its costs go down. So the more a factory, for example, produces, the more output a factory produces, the lower its costs of production will be in the long term. And the reason why economies of scale are a huge barrier to entry is because if on the market there is a big competitor, let's give an example of Apple. Imagine we have the smartphone industry and there is a new competitor that enters and they also want to sell smartphones. Apple will probably have high economies of scale because it produces large quantities of output each year, meaning it has low costs. And what this means for the new company that would enter the market is that they would not be able to achieve the same economies of scale in a short amount of time. So they will actually have very high costs of production before they are able to reach the same economies of scale as Apple does. And you can kind of realize how that will be detrimental to the company, because if they are producing something that is really expensive, they will get kicked out of the market quite quickly. Then we have product differentiation. Product differentiation basically means how unique the products are in the market. So again, let's give an example of Apple. Apple is a very unique product. They have very good branding. A lot of people buy from them simply because of the Apple logo. So their product is very different to customers and very unique. Now, if a new competitor was to enter the market, it would be really hard for them to differentiate themselves in the same way that Apple does. So if they are not able to offer a product that is clearly different from what is already in the market, again, they will be kicked out of the market very soon, meaning that we will have low threat of new entries. You can contrast this with a situation where we have a market where products are not differentiated, like the milk industry, for example. I bet that if you go to Albert Heijn or any other supermarket and you see the milk alley, it doesn't really matter to you which milk you choose, because they all have very much the same ingredients, the same price. They don't really go strong on branding, so you don't really care which product you will choose. And in this case, if we would have low product differentiation, it would be very easy for a new company to enter the same market and also offer milk, right? So the more differentiation, the higher barriers to entry. And again, if we have high barriers to entry, this means the threat of new entrants is lower. Then we have capital requirements, and this very simply means the costs of setting up a company on the market. So if it is very expensive to start a company, and this is, for example, very visible in car industries, maybe in IT industries, the AI industries, if it's expensive to enter the market in the first place, it's quite unlikely that new competitors will form easily. So again, we would have low threat of new entrants. Then we have switching costs, and this is something that relates mostly to customers. What this means is that if it is easy for a customer to go to another company, then the threat of new entrants increases. To give you an example, and I will just stick to Apple, a lot of you probably have more than one product from Apple. So you probably have the iPhone, you probably have a MacBook, you probably have AirPods, maybe some of you have an iPad, the headphones, or all the other kinds of products. What this means is that you have very high switching costs, right? Because all your products are so connected and you benefit from having more than one product, that if you were to switch to a competitor, this would actually be quite costly to you, right? So if you were to get a new laptop that is not a MacBook, but from some other brand, you lose the benefits of your Apple ID. Maybe some of you have Apple TV, for example, or Apple Music. So this means that if a new competitor would like to enter the market that Apple operates in, it would be hard for them to get new customers, because these customers have high switching costs that they will not want to give up. And then if we have those switching costs for customers, the threat of new entrants will be lower. And again, contrast this with the milk company. We have no switching costs when choosing milk, right? Because you buy it, you finish the bottle, and then you throw it in the trash, and you have no other benefits from it. So in that sense, the switching costs of choosing another milk provider are very low to us as customers. And this means that the threat of new entrants will be higher. And then we have access to distribution channels, and this one is quite logical. So for some companies, especially the ones that are already big on the market and have been operating for many years, they have well-established distribution channels. So for example, Tony's Chocoloni, they have contracts with Albert Heijn, with all the other supermarkets, maybe with some small stores. So the way they distribute the product to customers is already very well established. If a new chocolate company would like to enter a market, they would have to make their distribution channels from scratch, which is first of all very costly, and second of all very time consuming. So again, because they have to get access to those distribution channels, it's very likely that they will be kicked out of the market very quickly, and then again, the threat of new entrants will be lower. Then we have cost disadvantages independent of scale. And you can think about this bullet point as kind of things that the companies that are currently in the market got by luck. So for example, some companies have very good locations, or maybe some companies were able to get government subsidies very easily. Maybe some companies entered a market in a place where they have a very established customer base, right? So cost disadvantages independent of scale are simply those advantages that a certain company possesses, sometimes by luck, that a new entrant would not be able to get easily. So if a company has good location or they have good partnerships with suppliers, this is something that a new entrant will not be able to get. And again, in that sense, they will be kicked out of the market very quickly. And then we have government policy, and this simply means that sometimes the policy that governments implement make it hard for a certain market to have new entrants. And a very good example of this is the United States policy on airlines. So the government of the United States actually introduces a policy of the amount of the amount of airlines that can operate in the market. And this means, for example, that if they say, okay, 10 is the maximum amount of airlines that this country is allowed to have, then obviously your maximum number of competitors will be 10 because no other company is able to enter the same market. Right? I hope that this is all clear. Let me delete that and we can go to the next slide. So we have went through the first point of the threat of new entrants. I want to do a quick check with you guys. Can you let me know in the chat? Type yes if this is clear to you and you understand the barriers to entry and how they influence the threat of new entrants. And type no if you are still confused. Okay, I'm getting a lot of yeses. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Okay, yes, yes. All right, amazing. So I hope this is clear to everyone. Okay, I see some questions. So the thing about access to distribution, I can explain this one again towards the end of the session, so I can stay a bit longer to explain it once again. And for the extent to which you have to know this by heart, well, you don't have to know this by heart, but you have to know what this means. So if there is a question about economies of scale or product differentiation in the exam and how they influence the threat of new entrants, you have to be able to either remember this or you should be able to logically think about, okay, how does product differentiation affect the threat of new entrants? And I think this will become a bit clearer once we jump to the practice questions. All right, first point, and one of the hardest points, I think. So now let's go to the bargaining power of suppliers and buyers. Right, so what does it mean? Well, the bargaining power of supplier, by definition, is the power or leverage that the supplier has over a firm as he supplies raw material that the company needs, right? So you can think about it as simply imagine you have some negotiation going on. You have negotiation of terms between the supplier and the company. And the bargaining power of supplier is essentially a situation in which the supplier has more negotiation power. So they are able to negotiate better terms for themselves, maybe impose high prices on the company. And once again, if we have high bargaining power of suppliers, this means that the industry will be less attractive because this means that the company is kind of in a losing position because they, for example, have to pay more for the supplies. And once again, you need to be able to recognize how this affects industry attractiveness, but you also have to know in which situations the bargaining power of suppliers is high. And this happens in 6 situations. So first of all, bargaining power of suppliers is high when the industry is dominated only by a few large suppliers. And why is that the case? Well, if we have only a few suppliers on the market, this means that the company cannot easily switch a supplier, right? So it's not like they can easily be like, okay, I'm going to end the contract with you and I'm going to find another supplier. If there's only a few of them in the market, then the company kind of has no choice but to stay with the supplier because they don't have any other place to get supplies from. So then the supplier has more bargaining power or more negotiation power. The second situation is when substitute products are not available to the industry firm. And this essentially means, very similar to the first point, that the company cannot easily switch to another supplier, and they are very dependent on the particular supplier that they are currently going with, right? So substitute products means that the company has no choice but to use a specific kind of material. So think, for example, that you are running a sustainable company that produces clothing, and you think that the only sustainable materials come from an organic farm somewhere in the Netherlands. This is your only material that you can get. You cannot exchange or substitute this material with any other kind of cotton or wool or anything else. If that's the case, you also have a limited number of suppliers to go to. Bargaining power of suppliers is also high when the firm is not a significant customer for the supplier group. And this is simply because if the supplier is unhappy with the terms that they are given by the company, they can just easily say, okay, bye, you are not our big customer, we don't get a lot of money from you, we don't have a lot of income or revenue from you, so we don't really feel sad about letting you go. In other words, if the firm is not a significant customer for the supplier doesn't care that they will be using the company as the customer. Fourth bullet point, bargaining power of suppliers is high when suppliers' goods are critical to buyers' marketplace success, right? So again, this relates to the fact that if the supplies are crucial to the marketplace success, the company has no choice but to stay with the supplier, and they cannot go for supplies anywhere else, right? In that case, again, the negotiation power is with suppliers. Then we have the effectiveness of suppliers' products has created high switching costs for industry firms. And again, this means almost exactly the same thing as the first bullet point, meaning that if the company switches to another supplier, they have high switching costs. And those switching costs simply mean that it's more beneficial for the company to stay with the supplier that they are currently doing business with, because otherwise it's just really costly and inconvenient to change suppliers. And lastly, bargaining power of suppliers is high when the supplier poses a potential threat to integrate forward into the buyer's industry. And what this means is, imagine again a situation where you are running a sustainable clothing company and your supplier tells you that it would be very easy for them to actually also start producing clothing, right? So imagine that we have the supplier, I'm gonna put S as supplier, and we have the company. And now the supplier says that instead of just producing the materials, it's very easy for them to integrate forward, meaning that it's very easy for them to start their own company. And you can see how this is a problem because these two companies would then become competitors, right? So in those 6 situations, the bargaining power of suppliers is high. All right, and now we have bargaining power of buyers, which is very similar to the point number 2, but now we are looking at the other side of the supply chain, right? So before it was between the supplier and the company, and now it's between the company and the customers or the buyers themselves, right? So by definition, this is the power or leverage the buyer or customers have over a firm to obligate them to provide high quality, low priced products that they would like. And again, we have 4 situations in which the bargaining power of buyers is high. First of all, we have a situation where the customers purchase a large portion of the industry's output. And the way that this influences the bargaining power of buyers is that if we have a buyer who gives a lot of revenue, right? They buy a lot from the company. So this means that the company is actually very eager to keep the customers with them, right? If you have a revenue of 100 million euros, for example, but 80 million comes from one customer, you will be very, very eager and very interested in keeping that customer with you. And when this is the case, then the negotiation power stays within the buyers because they are in a better position. The second bullet point, very similar, is when buyers purchase a large portion of a seller's annual output. Right, so you can see that these are the only differences, but the idea stays the same. So if you have a buyer that gives your company or your industry a lot of revenue, you are of course interested that that buyer stays with you, and that gives them a lot of bargaining power. Third bullet point, when they could switch to another product with little or no cost. And you should guys recognize by now that this, of course, relates to the switching costs. And again, what this means, let's go back to the Apple example. If another company entered the market, a lot of people would be reluctant to switch because with Apple, they have very high switching costs. And in this case, as customers with Apple, we have very little bargaining power because actually it would be very hard for us to switch to another competitor, right? But if we could switch as buyers to another company, like with milk, very easily because we have no cost and no switching cost of doing so, then we have more bargaining power. And again, think about it in the sense that if you have low switching costs, it's very easy for you to move to a competitor. And in other words, very easy for the company to lose you as a customer. And lastly, bargaining power of buyers is high when the industry's products are indifferent or standardized. And again, if you have a product that is standardized or it's not unique for the industry at all, the customers will not care if they buy from you or from another company, right? So it's again very easy for you to lose a customer. Right, now that we've gone through these slides, I would like to do a check with you guys again. Can you let me know in the chat if, say yes, if the bargaining power of suppliers and buyers is clear to you, say no if it's unclear, and if you have any questions, you can also send them in the chat. Okay, yes, yes, yes. I'm very happy to see that a lot of you feel confident on the topic because I do know from the experience of teaching it that people find Porter's 5 forces very tricky at times. All right. Anyone else? If you not everyone has posted their answer, I think. Let me know. Okay, one more answer from someone, and then I will move on to the next slide. Yes. Thank you, Anna. All right. So now we have a very easy third point, threat of substitute products. This is my favorite one from Porter's 5 forces because I think it's the one that is the most straightforward. So the threat of substitute products, by definition, is the threat of a product of a company being replaced by another product by customers. And now, very important for the threat of substitute products is that the substitute doesn't have to be exactly the same product, but it has to be a product that allows a customer to achieve the same ends. And to give you an example, if we have a laptop for example, a substitute product doesn't have to necessarily be another laptop or a computer, but it can also be an iPad. It can also be a phone, for example. If someone uses their laptops to watch Netflix, then television could also be a substitute product, right? So it's not necessarily the same exact kind of product, but a product that provides customers with the same features. Similarly, if you think about a car, then a substitute product for a car could be any other means of public transport, right? Because if I own a car and I want to go to my Monday lecture, but there's a lot of traffic, then I can also get to my lecture by using the tram or the metro, on the train, or even a bike. So in the end, I achieve the satisfaction for me as a user is the same because I get to my lecture on time. And the reason why this is such a big threat is because it introduces way more competition to what you are doing, right? So if you are a car company, you can think like, okay, the threat of substitute products is any other car provided on the market. But then if you think about it in terms of other kinds of like public transport, bikes, maybe motorbikes, this means that actually your competition in the market or the possible competition that could enter the market sometime soon actually significantly increases. So that's why substitute products are so important to take into account when checking the attractiveness of the industry. All right, and going to our very last point of Porter's 5 forces before we do some practice questions, we have the intensity of rivalry among competitors. And again, by definition, this is the extent to which firms within the same industry exert pressure on each other and limit each other's profit potential, right? So intensity of rivalry, there are a couple of things that you have to know. So you have to be able to recognize situations in which the rivalry among competitors is high. So let's go through all of them together, because again, some of them may seem a bit tricky. So first of all, rivalry among competitors is high when there are numerous and equally balanced competitors, right? So if we have an industry, for example, with say 5 companies, I will do a very nice drawing for you guys. Imagine these are equal sized companies. If the competition is balanced, meaning each of those companies has more or less the same market share, then the rivalry among them will be very high. This is because they are really trying to steal each other's customers. We can contrast this with a situation where we have a market like probably the smartphone industry, I would guess, where Apple is a significantly bigger competitor than Samsung. I would think maybe a little bit smaller. And then we have all of those others really small smartphone providers. In this case, the rivalry among competitors is a little bit lower, and that's because we don't have that much balance in the industry. In other words, all of these companies realize that they are not really able to steal Apple's customers. So the rivalry does go a little bit down. Then the second situation in which we have high rivalry is slow industry growth. Slow industry growth means that the number of customers in the overall market doesn't really grow over time. And maybe to give you an example of what this means, imagine that when Apple first started selling their products, they had like 10,000 people in the market that they could sell to. But nowadays, it's probably like millions, right? So you can see that the industry has grown significantly. But there are certain industries that don't really experience this growth. And this means that the number of people who are buying a certain product each year doesn't really change. And if this is the case, then the rivalry among competitors is really, really high. And the reason for that is because those companies have to steal each other's customers, right? So the pool of customers doesn't grow, they steal from each other, versus if we have high industry growth, meaning there are new customers entering the industry or entering the market every year, the company can easily capture those new customers instead of stealing customers from their competitors. Then we have high fixed costs. So this means how expensive is it for a company to actually operate? If the fixed costs are high, then we have high rivalry in the market. And the reason for that is that the company has to have a lot of sales in order to be able to cover those costs, right? So the more expensive is the operation that you run, the more customers you want to have in order to be able to cover the high fixed costs that you incur. Then we have lack of differentiation or low switching costs. So if there is no differentiation on the market, the companies will really battle among each other. And this is again because they are fighting for each other's customers. So the products are not unique and they have to steal the buyers from each other. And last two bullet points, high strategic stakes. This one, to be honest, might seem a little bit vague, but think about it in terms that if we have high strategic stakes, this means that a company has a lot to lose. So for example, if a company is operating in the market where they have a lot of potential profit to be made, or maybe high strategic stakes means that the government is involved and they will, for example, offer subsidies to the business that performs the best in the market or has the best market share. In that case, the company has a lot to lose. So they will really engage in the competition in the industry. And very lastly, the rivalry will be high if there are high exit barriers. And high exit barriers means that it is really expensive or inconvenient for the company to leave an industry. So if the business decides to shut down or go bankrupt, first of all, they lose a lot of money. Second of all, they have to fire all of the employees. Another example could be a situation in which the business owner has really devoted themselves and their life to the company and they don't want to close it. So if it's the case that the industry is really hard to exit or it's really hard to close the business, the rivalry among competitors will also be high. All right, let me see. All right, so now that we have gone through all of those points, last question before we jump to the practice questions for the session. Can you guys let me know if the threat of substitute products and intensity of rivalry are clear to you? And again, type yes and type no if you are still confused. All right. Yes, yes, yes. Perfect. So I have included this image on the slide. I'm not gonna go through it right now. It's essentially all of those things that we have discussed. You will, of course, receive the slides after the session if you have to have a closer look. But the reason I included it is because I know there's a group of students who really like to have things explained as it is on this slide. But there is also a group of students who actually like to have a visual representation or like a map because that's how they memorize things. So you can look at it in your own time. Okay, there's a question in the chat. Threat of substitute is high when there is a lot of substitutes or vice versa. Yeah, the threat of substitutes is high when you have a lot of substitutes available in the market. Indeed. All right, let's try some practice questions. So the way that this will look is I will ask you guys to send me a private message in the Zoom chat. So make sure you are only sending it to me with your answers for the questions you see on the slides. I will give you a minute to think about them. And once everyone has sent their answers, I will reveal the solutions and we can go through those questions together. There are 9 questions. So we have 3 here. And then on the next slide, we do have more. All right, let's see. So I have seen a lot of very good answers, so good job, guys. Let's look at the first question. Which of the following decreases the threat of new entrants? And of course, high barriers to entry is the correct answer. Again, as a recap, those two work in opposite. So low threat of new entrants implies that we have high barriers to entry. But high threat of new entrants implies that we have low barriers to entry. So good job to those of you who answered this one correctly. And trust me that if this question was on your midterm, a lot of people would answer it wrong. So I think you are really ahead of your classmates. Then for the second question, which of the following can explain a high degree of rivalry among competitors? And this is answer A, slow industry growth. I have seen some people saying B or C, but these are incorrect. So a high degree of rivalry will be a situation in which we have high fixed costs. And again, remember, this would be due to the fact that a company would need a lot of sales to cover these costs. But then high differentiation is actually also a situation with low rivalry because high rivalry is present in those situations in which all of the products on the market are the same or standardized. Right, question 3. The threat of substitute is high for all of the following scenarios except the product is a highly differentiated, luxurious good. And I feel like that one, pretty much everyone answered correctly. So let's go to the next slide. And I see there's some questions, so I will have a look at those towards the end of the session. I do see them coming and I will answer them. All right, let's see. So, question number 4, bargaining power of suppliers is high when, of course, there is a limited number of suppliers of a particular product. Once again, this implies that it's very hard for a company to find another supplier. So the company is kind of forced to stay with the supplier they are in, and this gives the supplier a lot of negotiating or bargaining power. Question number 5, which of the following does not make an industry attractive? And this is the high customer bargaining power. Of course, if the customers hold a lot of bargaining power, this is not nice for the company, and we do not want that in our industry. And then for this last question of this slide, the high switching costs make it harder for a customer to switch to a competitor's brand. All right, now, as I said, there are more practice questions, but what I would quickly like ask for you guys to do is to fill in the evaluation form. It has 5 questions, so it should take like 2 minutes. So if you guys can just quickly scan the code, fill in the eval form, then we will do our last slide of practice questions, and I can then answer any questions that were posted on the chat. All right, I hope you guys got a chance to fill that in. So very quickly, I just wanted to make sure that you guys know the difference between the free and the full training, because of course they do differ a little bit. So if you are considering taking the midterm training with us or potentially the end term training in October, some things that you should know is, of course, that on the free training, we focus on only one topic, in this case, Porter's 5 forces. So we explain it in a lot of detail and we do some practice questions. But then in the full course, we cover all the material. So all the models, like the resource-based model, or for example, the different kinds of strategies, like differentiation strategy, cost leadership strategy, globalization, stakeholders, all of that I will cover in detail in the full training. So by taking that, you really make sure that you go through every single concept that can potentially come up on your midterm. We also have smaller groups. So this means that when you guys ask questions in the chat, I can actually answer them straight away and quite easily. So the lessons can be a bit more personalized. And then a big bonus is the 24/7 WhatsApp aid. So in the group chats or even privately with me as a tutor, you can post questions that I can answer and really help you prepare for your exam. Right? So if you want to sign up, there is a discount code that you can use. It's 17% and works 10 times. So if you want to see me again to make sure I can help you prepare for the midterm, you can use the discount code to purchase the midterm on the website or by using the QR code. And once again, you will receive the slides. So if the code doesn't work right now, or if you don't want to necessarily buy anything right now, you will have access to everything later on. So let's end this session. Oh, there is a question. Do you think the full training will be enough to pass or get a good grade? Yes, I think so, because in the midterm training, I really cover everything that you have to know, and I show you how the questions are structured on the exam. So yes, I do think it will be enough to pass and get a good grade. Great. All right. So last slide, and again, send me your answers privately in the chat. All right. I do see some answers still coming in, so maybe 10 more seconds, and then I will reveal the solutions. But I do see a lot of very good answers, so I'm very proud of you guys. All right, let's see. So again, I think almost everyone got all three correctly, which is amazing. So which of the following is true? And we have answer C. Porter's 5 forces is a tool to help companies assess the attractiveness and profitability of a particular industry. Right? So I'm very glad that you were able to recognize that the other answers are not true, especially answer B. So I think last year a lot of people made mistakes on that question, but of course Porter's 5 forces has nothing to do with calculating revenues. It's just about checking in the theoretical sense whether an industry is attractive or not. Question 8. An industry that has high barriers to entry, high supplier bargaining power, and high intensity of rivalry is not a profitable industry. Or another potential answer could be that it is not an attractive industry. And lastly, instead of taking a train home, Anna decided to take a taxi. This is an example of a substitute. Very well done. So this is the end of today's session. We went through the 5 forces model, and I hope right now you guys would answer my question from the beginning of the session of how confident you feel with the model with 100%. I think you did very good on the practice questions. And some of them were actually past exam questions. So I think you should feel very proud of yourselves. So if you don't have any questions, or if you don't have any concerns, or you don't want to listen to my explanation of other people's questions, okay, there are some questions I will answer now. So if you are not interested in my answers, feel free to leave the session, but I will of course stay and answer any doubts that you have. So the first question is, when is the deadline for buying your module? Well, there's no deadline really. As long as you buy it before the training starts, which is next Friday, but I would say you should make sure that you buy it before everyone else does, because we do have limited number of spots. So if you buy it too late, it might be the case that there is no longer a place in the group. So there is no deadline, but it is possible that it will be sold out. Let's see about other questions. Can you please explain again how slow industry growth intensifies the rivalry? And of course, so, okay, imagine that we have an industry and let's think about it in terms of simplified numbers. So we have 5 companies in the market and imagine that market size is 10,000. Very small market, but we want to simplify for the understanding. If the market doesn't grow, meaning that over years it's still 10,000, this means that those companies will have to fight for each other's customers. So the rivalry will be very intensified because they want to get customers from those other companies. But then imagine a situation in which, again, we have 5 companies and market size of 10,000. But now we have a situation where the market size grows by 5,000 every year. 5,000 every year. What this means, oh, every size. Well, imagine this is year. What this means is that those 5 companies, instead of competing for each other's customers, they can move their efforts into those new customers. So people who do not belong to any company yet, they are new to the industry or new to the market. It's way more easy to target those customers than to get customers from your competitors, right? So if you are fighting for each other's customers because the industry doesn't grow, the rivalry will be very intense. But if the industry grows, meaning you have more potential people that you can sell to every year, then the rivalry will be a bit less because there's more potential people that could buy your product. I hope that's clear. You can send me a message in the chat, like with clear or yes, if you got it. And if you still don't understand or something is unclear, let me know and then I can explain again. Okay, I see that it is clear. Perfect. Okay, I see another question. Are the total customers important for economies of scale? While our teacher said that economies of scale are not relevant to the airline industry, but lots of customers would make average fixed costs per flight less, right? Yeah, it's a tricky question. So normally economies of scale relate to tangible products, meaning like a durable product that you use and not a service. So maybe that helps a little bit. So if you, we cannot really apply economies of scale to airlines or like a hairdresser or going to a restaurant because those are services. Economies of scale is more about the production itself. And you can also let me know if that's clear or if you have any other doubts. I will explain again. And I do think there was another question somewhere in the beginning. Okay. Can you explain a bit more about access to distribution? Let me see. Okay, you are still in the session. So of course, access to distribution. Let me go to that slide. All right. So what this means is that imagine that you have a company. So we have, for example, Tony Chocoloni, right? The chocolate company, TC for short. What Tony's does is that it distributes its product, first of all, to its own outlets. So if you go to Amsterdam Central, for example, they do have their own restaurant where you can buy the chocolate. But they also distribute this to, for example, Albert Heijn. And you can also get Tony Chocoloni and Jumbo, for example. Right? So what Tony Chocoloni has done is it has already established its distribution channels. So the way that Tony Chocoloni is available to customers is already well established in the market, right? The company has partnerships with those companies. They can get to customers very easily, or in other words, they can distribute their product very easily. But now if we have a new company in the market that also wants to sell chocolate, this means that they have to make or arrange their distribution channels on their own, right? So if it is very time consuming or very expensive to find distribution channels, this means that it will be harder for the company to enter the market, right? So if Albert Heijn says, for example, okay, we have so many chocolates already, we will not make a partnership with any new chocolate provider, that new company will have a hard time finding a distributor. And if they cannot find a distributor, they cannot sell to their customers, meaning they will be kicked out of the market. And what this also implies is that the threat of new entrants will go down. Is that clearer now, or does it make sense? Okay, perfect. So I'm guessing that's a yes. Amazing. Let me see what time it is. Okay, 6 past. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining the free session with me. I hope you had somewhat of a good time. You feel more confident about Porter's 5 forces now for your midterm. I will, of course, share the slides in our group chat and hopefully see you in the midterm training next week. If not, then good luck with your midterm, and then maybe I will see you sometime in the future in another training. Thank you for joining. Bye.